Is it?
Okay, thank you everyone for making it to today's meeting. We have a very special guest speaker today. Mike Landeck will be talking about his experience in cybersecurity and his slide on accessing risk. So, Mike, if you are ready to go, set.
I am. Thanks for having me. Let's go this way. So I'm Mike Landeck. I haven't been to Cal Poly in a couple of years, but I've spoken there a dozen times to, I think, most of your clubs. I've been part of ITC for a long time. I'll be there in a couple of weeks as a judge for the DFIR part. But I want to thank you all for coming. I know it's close to finals. You're back from spring break. So I appreciate you being here. And what I'm doing today, when I was at Berkeley, there was a couple pieces of advice I left with that have guided my career. And the first one was one of my professors talked about, some of you are going to go on and become the leaders of your industry, and you'll always be on top of your industry. But whenever you're at the top of your industry, you're about 4 years away from being a dinosaur, being unemployable. And that stuck with me. And I retired. I'm semi-retired. I still have a few clients, but I don't work like I used to. But throughout my, after graduating Berkeley, I'd work the usual Silicon Valley 50, 60 hours a week. And then I'd spend about 20 hours a week keeping my skills up. Whatever the next big thing was, I'd make sure I was an expert before it hit. Sometimes I'd become an expert on something that never hit and was superfluous, and sometimes I nailed it. But I focused really hard on keeping my skills up. We can talk, it unquestionably helped me be successful in my career. We can talk about if it was worth the sacrifice. It's a different story. But the other thing that I heard from Professor Mester was contradictory, and I didn't give it enough credence until later on in my life. But he talked about if you learn the fundamentals early and well, you'll never be outdated. So these things seem contradictory, and it turns out they're not. And the reason we're talking about risk today, we're talking about risk, is it doesn't matter where technology goes. When you're in cybersecurity, your job really is to analyze risk, to understand risk, communicate risk, and mitigate risk. We are simply here to help the businesses manage their information risk. And if you could be the greatest pen tester in the world, and if you can't communicate the risk and what you find, you'll never really go much. So risk is going to be really important to us. So this may be old to you, but this is the hello world of risk assessment, the probability times impact quadrant. So if you look at this grid, you got a little guy who's going to jump over a hole. The odds of him falling in are really low. And if he does fall in, it's no big deal. So because of that, in the industry, we'd say that's a low risk, and that makes perfect sense. In the next quadrant, you've got him trying to jump over a really long pit, and the probability of him falling in is pretty high. But if he falls in and he doesn't hurt himself, we call that still a low risk, because with the low, there's a low probability he'll hurt himself or fall, and a low probability he'll be hurt. Here, there's a high probability that he'll fall, but if he falls in, nothing happens. So it's still a low risk. It gets a little more complicated here, because in the high impact, low probability, there's a very small chance he'll fall, but if he falls, it's going to be really bad. And in the industry, we say that's a medium risk. And we're going to talk more about if that's true or not true. But that's a medium risk. And the last one, of course, he'll probably fall and he'll probably hurt himself, and that's a higher catastrophic risk. But we're going to go beyond the basics with that. So I want to talk, before I get started, I want to talk about some key terms. And there's very few of you online, so if you want to unmute, feel free to unmute and call out. But in this scenario, for there to be a risk, there has to be an asset. If there's no asset we care about, there's no risk. So in this scenario, what would the asset be? You can put it in chat, call it out, or I'll just continue. Okay. The asset here is our person. It's his health, safety, well-being. Yep, Ian, that's exactly right, the guy. So the guy is our asset. So what would the threat be here? Exactly. The threat's going to be um, the jump attempt itself. The threat is if he doesn't jump, there is no threat. And what would the vulnerability be? Oh, hey, Daniel. Didn't see you join. Thank you. Vulnerability is, yep. Vulnerability is the failed jump, right? I mean, technically the vulnerability is human. He's not going to have a perfect jump every time. And the impact is kind of obvious. The impact is his medical bills. He hurts himself, misses work, whatever. The loss event, and it depends on where you work. In the industry, we call it a loss event. You can say bad things happen. In DC, they call it the boom. Whatever you want to call it, the loss event is the bad thing that happens. And the risk, you should all have this one already. The risk is the probability, which is about times the impact. So when we go forward, that's what we're going to be talking about. Okay, and this is a real life example. So when you go on into cybersecurity, and particularly application security, you'll be getting reports. There'll be pen test reports, web assessment reports, whatever they are. You'll get reports, and they kind of all look like this. You're going to have a severity rating, the confidence rating, the CWE, which is common weakness numerator we'll talk about. Sometimes you throw on the OWASP top 10, and here we have one that's number one, and your risk score, which we'll talk about. And right now, if you're a CISO or a security leader, and you got this, there's nothing more here. So you have to take it at face value, and hopefully you're uncomfortable and want more. But when you drill down to this, you've got, I missed a key slide somewhere. Where was that? Oh, I'm sorry, up here. I want to talk about this real quick. If you look on the right-hand side, I call it my hierarchy of credibility. Now, I'm a security consultant. I work with boards of directors and CEOs and CISOs, and I get paid to drink coffee and give them my opinion. Now, if I say something is a risk, hopefully they believe me, but that only goes so far. They can't tell an auditor, or when the lawyers come, they can't say, well, Mike said so. They need something more. The next thing you can do is industry standard, like an OWASP top 10. An OWASP top 10 carries more credibility than Mike says so. But even that, if you go to court, get sued, have auditors, only go so far. So you need to have industry framework. So as you progress in your career, it's going to be really important you speak the regulatory framework. A big part of our talk today is going to be how to do that. So the real life example. So the severity level is critical, and that's just someone said so. Your pen tester said so. Your CWE, that stands for common weakness enumeration. And what that is it's just an absolute giant, huge list of things that a company, a nonprofit called MITRE, it's a part of NIST, sponsored by the federal government. It's a giant list of things they say are weaknesses. So instead of Mike saying SQL injection is a weakness, you can say the federal government thinks SQL injection is a weakness. So there's no arguing that. You can say Mike's wrong. You really can't say that this is wrong. And that's a regulatory issue. So if you go back to the OWASP top 10, we all kind of agree to that. I mean, I don't think anyone in their right mind would say the OWASP top 10 aren't weaknesses, but it's an industry standard. So auditors may or may not accept it, and lawyers may not accept it. And the bottom one is a risk score. And here it says 9.1, a SQL injection is 9.1 out of 10. And a 9.1 out of 10 implies it's imminently exploitable, and that when it's exploited, that will probably bankrupt your business. That's a very big deal. So if you're a CISO or a security leader, or wherever job you are, if you see this with nothing else, you've got a very big deal. And if this is all if you don't ask any questions or push any harder, shame on you. So I'm going to give you some scenarios. So let's say you're a CISO and you're getting this report, and your head of network security, so you know that applications in our most protected network compartment, only 2 people in the company have access to that. At this point, do you still think the risk is a 9.1? The answer is probably not. If you only have two people in the company and they have that kind of level of access, they probably have direct access to your DBMS anyway. So at this point, we'd want to do a better analysis on, is this really a 9.1? Is it really critical? So someone else, your head of development, steps up and says, that's old news. Half of our team knows that exists. Does that increase your risk or decrease your risk? And the answer is it probably increases the probability, because the more people who know about a vulnerability, the more likely it is to be exploited. And we talk about the OWASP risk assessment framework, we're going to see how that works. And this next one, and when you do pen testing on web applications, it's very normal when you have a firewall in place that you have an allow list and you pen test it twice. You pen test it with the firewall and you pen test it without the firewall. And the reason being, if you're pen testing against the firewall, you're just testing the firewall, not the application. Your client's needs are better served by you doing a simple configuration review and their process review of their firewall. So it's very normal to turn the firewall off. So if you found out that critical severity finding was done with the firewall turned off, in my mind, that 9.1 gets a whole lot less. And this next one, for those of you who don't administer databases, a table can have different permissions. Select means it just outputs data. It runs a query and says, here's what we found. Insert means you can add data to it. Update means you can change it. And delete it means you can get rid of data. So for those of you going on to get certifications, there will always be questions about the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. And what that means is, confidentiality is, are you keeping the data private? Integrity means, are you keeping the data from being changed? And availability means, are you keeping the data available? Is it being DOSed? Are you deleting it? So when you look at this, the account being used for the database only allows people to see the data. A bad actor using SQL injection couldn't add data, couldn't change data, and can't drop your tables. All they can do is see it. So turn off your mutes, talk in chat. What do you need to know about this data set to make a decision on risk? Did I lose you all?
How secure is the password?
Yeah. And what you care about a lot is you care about the data. Because if you've got a database full of public data that anyone can see, if you've got hackers who steal data that's already public, you've got zero impact. The impact is zero, so your risk, of course, is low. And then all the way to the top, you've got restricted data where people can go to jail and lies end. Then your risk becomes very, very high. And what happens a lot with penetration testers and assessors is they don't take the time to get to know your business. So if they come to me and say you've got a critical vulnerability on data everyone can see, that tells them they didn't do their homework. So when you go on to become a penetration tester, knowing the data, knowing why they have it, knowing why it matters means a lot. In the CIA triad, availability, if they can knock an application offline that I only use once a quarter, that's not going to be nearly as big a deal as an application that's used every day to keep people alive. So when you assess risk, you always have to understand what the data is, why it matters, what happens if it gets stolen, what happens if it gets changed, and what happens if people can't get to it. And in this case, we're going to come back to this. In this case, we'll call the data restricted, the most sensitive type of data. And then this one, for those of you who are going into secure operations center type of work, let's say there's a SOAR in front of it. Let's say there's there's technology in front of this that detects attacks and actually has playbooks to automatically block the attacks. If this was sitting in front of the application with SQL injection, does that change your impact score or not change your impact score? it's going to reduce it, because if someone's attacking your database and they automatically get their account turned off with the first couple attempts, your probability goes way down. I'm going to put this all together, and for those of you who I would like you to do is I'm going to stop sharing my presentations. I'm going to start sharing the OWASP risk assessment tool. And this is really important. I'd love for you guys to go along with this. You can either watch me or go along. Let me put this in chat. Everything we just talked about is here. So let me put. Okay. So you should be able to see this. I'm going to give you anyone who wants to be there by now, hopefully can see this by now. But we're talking about SQL injection. And this is divided into 4 parts. We've got threat agent factors, meaning this is about the attackers. You've got vulnerability factors, which is about your vulnerability, or in this case, SQL injection. You've got the technical factors, which really, OWASP calls it technical. I really call it more data. Then you've got the impact to your business. When you put these 4 things together, you'll get that. Remember, we talked about that score of 9.1. This is how the pen testers got the 9.1, although most likely it's just the default from the tool. So for skills required for SQL injection, and feel free to unmute if you'd like. How hard is it to do SQL injection? The answer is not hard at all right now, that you've got tons of automated tools. Motivation, we know that this is highly sensitive data, highly restricted data, so we're going to say high reward. Opportunity is how easy is it for the attackers to get access? And here we know that it's only 2 people in the whole company have access, so it's very difficult. Population size is tiny. So our threat agent factors, you don't need many skills. They've got a lot of motivation to attack you, but there's not a lot of people that can attack you. And it's really hard. So vulnerability factors, ease of discovery. There's automated tools available, so it's not hard. And the other thing we know about is half the company knows it exists. Ease of exploit, well, there's a couple firewalls in place. So at this point, it's probably more theoretical. There are those people in the world that can bypass a WAF, but there's not many. Awareness, it's public knowledge. Intrusion detection, and I love this. If you see nothing else, say look at this. If it's logged and no one looks at it, it's a 3, which means it's really bad. If it's logged without being looked at, it's an 8, and if it's logged and looked at, it's a 3. So people that have their logging turned on and don't look at it, it's almost worthless. So here we know we have a SOAR in place. I know I'm talking fast. And we talk about the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We know that confidentiality is everything. Extensive critical data. Since the account doesn't allow the database to be updated, integrity is not changed. There's nothing. Availability is nothing. And accountability, we don't really know. Accountability means our ability to track down the attacker. And in this case, we don't really know. The fact that it's on an internal network helps. The fact that there's so much logging helps. So I'm going to kind of go in the middle and say it's possible. Financial damage, because the data was what's called restricted. We know it's significant. Reputation damage is something you as a pen tester, you don't know. The business has to help you with this. But we're just going to say a 5. Non-compliance, if it's restricted data, that means it's heavily regulated, which means there's lots of lawyers involved. And privacy, we don't really know. So doing this, when we click submit, it'll either be a 9.1 like the report said, or in this case, we have a medium times a medium, which means it's a medium severity. Or in the four is it's in the fours. Now I'm going to pause here because this is one of the more important parts of my talk. Did everyone who wants to understand this understand it? I'll assume that's a yes. So we talked about industry standard, and this is an industry standard report, and I find this one incredibly helpful. So when I do a risk assessment, I use this, but I'll write several paragraphs about each one of these. So when I'm done, it's a multi-page report. This is industry standard. Oh, yeah, I see. So Daniel, yeah, the answer is it does take some getting used to. And more importantly, it takes knowing your customer, your client. When you do this, you can't. That's why there's when you have the automated scanners, they have a default, and the default's a high water mark, like that 9.1 you saw, which was an actual snippet. The scanners will default to the most critical severity rating because they have to assume the worst. So when you do it, when you have a pen test done, and the pen testers know nothing about your business, know nothing about the importance of your data, they're going to assume the worst. So what they'll give you is your high water mark. So it takes some getting used to, and it takes getting to know your client. Now, the next one, this one's also kind of helpful. See, it overwrote it. Let me, it Zoom overwrote my thing. One moment. The next one is from NIST, and this is the CVSS calculator, and that stands for Common Vulnerability Security Scoring. And this goes, instead of it being Mike said, it's something the industry all agrees on. So a SQL injection, Mike could say it's really bad, Daniel could say it's kind of bad, and Brad could say it's not bad. And then you've got a client who's just confused. In fact, I'll give you an actual story. I had a client call me and say, our pen testers found a SQL injection. It's in an old code base. We really can't afford to fix it. Would you please help us confirm it? And I said, don't even, if you've got user input going to your database, don't pay me. It's there. I mean, don't. And they said, well, there's some tricky factors going on. And what happened is the developers were limiting the input to only 3 characters. So there absolutely positively was user input going from the browser through the web server to the DBMS. That was unquestionable. But the attackers could only get 3 characters in there. And what my team and I decided on was it's impossible to actually exploit a database using SQL injection in 3 characters or less. You can get your single quote there, and then you have 2 characters left. And what ended up happening was probability was absolutely high. They absolutely had a SQL injection vulnerability, so our probability was very high, but the impact was 0. So remember, if you've got a high probability and a 0 impact, you have a low vulnerability. So instead of it being Mike said so, I had to supply data, I had to write it up, I had to make it in such a way that if they, the lawyers came and auditors came, they wouldn't all get sued. So this one comes from NIST, it's the federal government, and it's called the CVSS calculator. And throughout your career, you'll see CVSS scores. And this looks super daunting, but it's not. There's tool tips over each one. And the first line is attack vector. And it really is, can you go to Starbucks and attack it through Tor? Can you attack it from can you be on your corporate network and pivot networks? Do you have to be local, or do you have to put your hand on the computer? These are all just poorly worded ways of saying that. So in our SQL injection example, we know that only 2 people in the whole company can get there through a protected compartment. So that's very local, right? And attack complexity, is it hard to hack or easy to hack? And in this case, SQL injection is pretty easy to attack. And privilege, was someone have a question? Okay, privilege is required. We don't know, the report doesn't tell us if it's authenticated page or not authenticated page, which would make a big difference here. But because we know it's in a very privileged compartment, we're safe to say hi. User interaction, does it mean the user has to click something? So if I send you a phishing email that goes to your junk folder that you never see, that exploit does not get transacted. And in SQL injection, we don't need a user involved, so there's no user interaction. And the scope's kind of tricky, but when you talk about scope, it's, can I change the things? Can I, if I'm an attacker, can I pivot networks? Can I change configuration files? Can I basically, is there any lateral movement involved? And here, and this, I know this is a little bit tricky. I'm going to just make some assumptions for you. The fact that the account was read only, and the fact that it was select only, means that I have a pretty much it's theoretically impossible to pivot. So we're going to say unchanged. Confidentiality, we already know that's our CIA triad, and throughout your career you're going to hear that all the time. But the confidentiality is they can see all the data. Integrity, can they change the data? We know they can't. And can they knock the database offline or drop our tables? And we know they can't. So when you look up here, that score of 9.1, this pretty much matches our OWASP score exactly. And it's a 4.4, or in this case, would be about a median. And I know that's really complicated. I threw a lot at it. So for user interactions, who is the user in this case? Ian, that's a great question. There is no SQL injection is a direct attack without user involvement, so there is no user. It's your threat actor or bad guy going straight for the database without the need to pivot. If they needed to send a link, to your database administrator and then do it, then the user interaction would be through your DBAs. But great question. So when you go on and graduate and go into the industry, you just can't say it's bad. You can't say I hacked. We're going to talk about this more. You have to be able to speak the language. And the language is through, we've talked so far about your risk, your probability times impact matrix, which is this, or your CVSS scores, which is this. Both are going to be super important to you in your career. And I went through really fast, and I'm happy to, I'm going to give you my email address at the end. I'm happy to talk more about it later. We only have 50 minutes today, but I really want you to take away from this going beyond the defaults. When you do a pen test, don't go with the defaults. Understand your client. I'm going to give you some really great examples here. Well, any questions? There's only a few people online, so I'm happy to take questions. None? Okay. So what we've learned.
One question in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So yeah, the answer is yes. So the matrix is a little bit more general. The CVSS is usually specific to software risk. But the matrix also works very good, especially if it's in production. On a corporate internet, for example, it's very useful. Both are good for software. I come from a product security background. My background is talking about software risk. So I apologize for this this whole Zoom stuff. So you have a loved one, you go to the doctor, and the doctor says there's a 1 in 500 chance your loved one will die, so it's a medium risk. I mean, this really, you're not going to accept that. If I had my wife or kids or your brother or sister in the hospital, and the doctor said there's a 1 in 500 chance they'll die, I'm not going to take a sigh of relief and go, oh, good, it's only a medium risk. I'm going to lose my mind. So this goes back to knowing your business, because if it's going to be a catastrophic risk to your client, and you tell them it's a medium, they're going to kick you out. This next one is actually another real life example I had, and this is directly about software products. But the company had a new product coming out, and if they released it before Christmas, their projected profits were 30 million. After Christmas, that plummeted. They lost their window. Okay, way far along in the pipeline, they found a cyber risk, and the analyst said fines and penalties, reputational damage, everything combines about a $1.5 million risk, and which means the company would still make a profit of 28.5 million instead of $30 million. Now, the security team said, our policy says you can't release code with high severity vulnerabilities. You're not allowed to release this. That's what the security team said. And I get called in and they said, Mike, what's the reality here? And you don't need a lot of experience to answer this question. I think you all know what I said. 28.5 million is better than no million. But before I said that, I had two questions. I asked them two questions before I gave them my answer. Anyone want to guess what those two questions would be? Yeah. The first was, how much do you trust the number for projected profits? Is that a fuzzy number? Is it a guess? You know, and the answer was, it was really solid. They really trusted their product managers. They trusted their analysts, and that they were very confident in that number. And I said, well, how much do you trust your CISO team? When you talk to your compliance officer, your CISO, your privacy officer, you know, how much do you trust that number? And they said, we trust it very much. And I said, you know, you have to be polite to clients. I wanted to call them dummies. But I said, in that case, you have a choice of making 28 million or 0 million. I would go with the 28 million. And this is an actual real life example I've experienced. But if you don't have a risk focused mind and you just focus on your governance, you're not just going to bankrupt your company. What's going to happen is you'll lose credibility. When you graduate and go on, you'll be, a lot of times you heard that, you know, security is our obstructionist, security is preparing forward progress. And if you're hearing that where you work, what that means is security is not working with the business, they're working against them. And I've always viewed my job is to help educate them on what the risk is. What they do with that is their choice. I mean, I've worked in, you know, something called Sarbanes-Oxley, where the actual CEO goes to jail. So I can actually say, if you do this, there's a chance you'll go to jail. If you do, I'll miss you, but that's your choice. Okay, Star Wars. I love this part. So, and these are all real things I've heard. So we've got different ways to communicate risk. So remember in Star Wars, what happened is there's this vulnerability in the exhaust system, and Luke Skywalker shot a missile into it, and it blew the whole thing up. Right. So when you look at the risk for that, you've got probability times impact. The probability was very low because it's really hard to. They didn't think anyone existed who could shoot that well, and they knew the whole thing might blow up, and they accepted the risk as a medium risk, and the whole thing blew up. I've actually had, you know, for those of you who know me, I hire a lot of young rock stars out of school. I've hired several people from Cal Poly. And I like to hire like rock stars, really just badass pen testers. And I call it the rock star mentality. You get out of, you know, wherever you are, you win competitions, you're great, you're recruited, and you've earned your swagger. You've earned the right to have an attitude. And I've actually had pen testers go in front of my clients and say, your developers suck, you're screwed. Those were their exact language. And what do you think my client did with that? You know, they didn't fire me, but they were close. And that's just not how you communicate. It's true. The developers did have a big problem, but that wasn't helpful to the CEO. That wasn't helpful to our relationship. And I call it the rock star mentality. If you're that good, you know, in August, go to Las Vegas, go to DEF CON, get yourself a black badge, be a rock star. But when you're in front of clients, the black t-shirt comes off and the dress shirt comes on, is how I explain it. The next step is our automated tools find a critical vulnerability, unsanitized input to the exhaust ventilation. Now, if they told Darth Vader that, that's true. I mean, it's not wrong, but it's not helpful. And when I hire a pen tester or an assessment company, and they tell me this, the first thing I think is your skills stop at running automated tools. All you can do is run a tool. And in that case, I could just bought the tool myself, or in most cases are open source, and run it myself. Why are you here? So just communicating this with nothing else isn't going to help your career. The next one, and this is where we talk about the matrix, is there's a very low probability that the Rebel Alliance can blow up the Death Star, which is true. But if they did, it would be bad, which is true. Therefore, we have calculated the risk severity as median. Also true. Okay, kind of helpful, right? That's, if you're Darth Vader, you can work with that. And if a company told me that, I'd have a bunch of questions, but I'd be okay with that. And everything we've talked about now is what are called qualitative analysis. And the next one to be Jedi level is quantitative analysis. And if they went to Darth Vader and said there's a 1% probability of a $91 billion credit loss, and that's actually in the movie, cost him 91 billion credits, and it will kill all of you, this vulnerability could kill all of you if it's not remediated, that's super helpful, right? And if you're Darth Vader, you're going, okay, I got that. I'm not going to choke you. I want to know more. But when you say this, that's never enough. And I'll acknowledge up front, as a penetration tester, it's not your job to know the rest, but it's absolutely your job to help the business get the rest. And what happens next is the very first thing that the CEO is going to ask me if I'm in his office is, how much will it cost me to fix it, and how long will it take? Because the CEO, all the CEO cares about is budget and schedule. And if I say, well, that's not my job, I don't care, you figure it out, I'm not getting invited. But if I work with the development team, the project managers, and I have the project manager in the office with me, and I've educated them, and the project manager says, I've been working with Mike, and it's going to cost us about $2 million to fix it, but that $2 million will save us 91 billion. And it's going to take 3 months to fix with our current people, but for an extra $1 million, we're going to fix it next week. The CEO is going to hug me, right? What you're doing at that point is you're taking a risk and saying, your architects suck, you got a problem, to here's the problem, here's the actual quantified risk, here's what it takes to fix it, and here are the people that can help you do it. And if you do that, that client will invite you back over and over again, and all of a sudden you've got your own consulting practice. And that's really important. So I've been speaking really fast. I've got a few more slides, but I want to pause here and see if there's any questions, any comments. I've thrown a lot at you. Are you all still there?
No questions for me.
Okay, great. And we're almost done. And one of the big mistakes people make is when they look at that 9.1, because it's a number, they think it's quantitative. It's a quantitative risk assessment. Quantitative usually means numbers. And for those of you in the data program, those are, they're ordinal. If I can replace a number with a high, medium, low type of score, it's not truly quantitative. Quantitative is that Jedi I talked about. So this is called a Monte Carlo analysis. And what that means is you take all the risk factors, all the mitigations, basically everything we saw in that OWASP calculator. You take and you give it a high score, high water mark, low water mark, and average. You give it all of that, and you send it to a bunch of Python code, and it runs 10,000 scenarios. And it actually gives you this curve. It's called a loss exceedance curve. And with this risk, if you look at this, it's pretty clear. Um, if this person doesn't fix this risk, there's a 50% chance they'll have a $5.7 million loss event, right? Now, what we don't know is how much it costs to fix. If they can fix it for $1,000, they'd be stupid not to fix it. If fixing it costs $20 million, they probably shouldn't fix it, right? So those are all information we don't have, but you can go to a CEO or you can go to your stakeholder and you can give them this, because there's a small chance it'll only be 51 million. And you'll notice it's not zero, because and the reason it's not zero is if they've got me in their office, they've already spent money. And according to this analysis, all the numbers we fed it, the maximum is about $10 million loss event. So we don't know how much it costs to fix it, but at this point, they've got a really good chance of making a smart business decision on what to do with that risk. And if you, this is, I'll put it in chat before we end. This is called factor analysis of information risk, or FAIR for short. This is actually my own personal Python code, but there's Excel sheets out there. We'll do this for free. It takes a class and a lot of studying. You put the information in an Excel sheet, and it gives you this kind of information. So for those of you who are going into any kind of assessment or risk management process, and you're bored over the summer, take a few hours to learn FAIR, factor analysis of information risk, because you're gonna go from high, medium, low risk to this kind of information. And if your goal is to do any kind of consulting, this is what you want to have. Okay, and just real quickly, and this we talk about talking to clients. This is something new pen testers don't get right away. But depending on who you're talking to, what they care about is different. If you're talking to the software development team, you better be able to talk about the technical details and how to fix it. The developers don't care about the financial impacts. They want to know what line of code you found it in, how do you exploit it, how to fix it. And generally, if you approach them respectfully, they're pretty good about it. Your security team needs to know everything. Security team should care about your compliance, financial impact. Your program managers, project managers, they want to know how to fix it. They want to know any compliance concerns, meaning who's going to jail, fines and penalties, who's getting sued, and the financial impact. Your compliance officer cares a lot about compliance and very little about the technology. Your privacy officer doesn't care about the technology. And when you talk to your CEO, I've been on calls where the pen testing team was addressing a really big risk to the CEO, and they're trying to explain the minute technical details of how they owned it. And the CEO actually just hung up without saying goodbye and let his chief of staff take over. And to make matters worse, after the call, they wanted the CEO to hire them to come back next year. The CEO won't return their call. Had they actually talked to the CEO about what the CEO cared about, here's how you could get sued, here's how not to get sued, here's what it costs, they probably would have done much better. And the board of directors and the CEO are the same thing. But this may be a little bit later in your career, but you should start thinking about this now. And then just lastly, every organization has their own language. It'll be written up in their policies and procedures or their governance. Every organization, they say the same thing with different words. And it's so important you speak their language. And this is just an example. I took quotes from the movie Star Wars, and I put them into because the beauty of the OWASP risk calculator is it's open source. If it doesn't work for you, change it. It's right there on GitHub. The link's in the deck. You can log it and change it. So I actually took quotes from the movie. So if I'm talking to Darth Vader, I'm actually able to speak the language. So lastly, thank you so much for having me. It's good to be back. I haven't spoken. I've actually been out of the hospital for the last 2 years. But before that, I was at Cal Poly Pomona a lot. I'm not an alumni, but I've spoken there quite a bit. I've been involved in a lot of your different competitions and career nights. I've probably in all seriousness, I've probably reviewed over 50 resumes from Cal Poly students and get jobs, and I've hired several Cal Poly students. So what I want you to do, I'll be there for ITC on the 26th. If you want to come introduce yourself, I'd love that. Daniel, I hope you're there. Hope to see you there. And if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, here's my LinkedIn. And I'm going to call out something I call the Cal Poly politeness. Every year I tell the Cal Poly students, connect with me on LinkedIn. And they don't. And when I see them, I say, well, why didn't you do that? I said, well, Mr. Landeck, I thought I'd be disrespectful. I'm not Mr. Landeck, I'm Mike. And this is your career. It's now the time to be shy. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, please feel free. If you don't, that's okay too. But I'm always happy to review resumes. So for those of you looking for internships or jobs, having an extra pair of eyeballs on your resume is good. And if you're applying for a company, and I have contacts there, I've been in the industry long enough, I know most people. Say, Mike, I met you at Cal Poly. Would you put in a good word for me? And the answer is I will. So again, I appreciate you guys coming. I know it's late in the year and you have finals, you have ITC, you're fresh off of spring break. You spent your lunch hour hearing me, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Mike, thank you so much for that slide presentation. Really appreciate what you had to say. And there's a lot of really cool, interesting, and insightful stuff that you said this meeting. So I can't thank you enough. Unfortunately, we have to close the meeting up real soon because of a class. So I'll be doing that in a minute. But again, just want to thank you so much. And for everyone who joined the meeting, I also want to thank you so much for joining the meeting. And hopefully we'll see you this Friday for our workshop. But yeah, thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.